Hi, I'm Patty Kennedy-Zafred, and I'm delighted to share with you my piece from 3D Expressions, Shift Change. Telling a story and creating a narrative is always at the heart of my work. Part of my series featuring working men and women of the 1940s and 50s, this accordion book is built from silk-screened images of Pittsburgh steelworkers on hand-dyed fabric and quilted. The composition actually was created almost by accident when I discovered that by stitching Peltex with a zigzag, it became flexible in either direction. As I stitched together one page and then another, I ended up with this fun result. Next. The books can be arranged in nearly any configuration, small, pulled out, circular, and on the front of this one, you can see the attachment of a vintage dues paid button, which the steelworkers had to wear every day, representing that they had paid their union dues for that month. Every month, there was a different color. I have a collection of those. Next. This is another piece from the Steel Town series, a diptych called Second Shift. I find these images really compelling, representing men from different backgrounds and cultures, all working so hard to provide for their families and their children. The leftover prints from several of these quilts provided me with the materials for the accordion book that's in 3D Expressions. The Steel Town series was inspired, of course, by my hometown of Pittsburgh, where the steel industry at one time was a dominant force in our economy. Next. Making the accordion books is really fun and easy to manage compared with creating a 6 or 7 foot quilt. This piece, Veld Windows, based on vintage postcards of geisha from Japan, features not only quilting, but embellishments of painting, image transfer of vintage postage stamps, and some Japanese writing. The book also made use of additional silk screen prints from larger quilts. Instead of using a stitched edge, this book I hand bound with fabric, like binding the edge of a quilt. It was definitely hard on my hands. Next. This is called Coal Town, Second Shift. And again, utilizing the historical images courtesy of the Library of Congress and the National Archives, both a real treasure trove of beautiful photographs from our nation's past. It's embellished with numbered copper hang tags. I don't know if you can see a couple of them, which the miners would take down into the shaft when they checked out their equipment. At the end of the shift, the board where the tags were hung would be checked to make certain all the tags had been returned, which indicated then that all the miners had come safely out of the shaft. Next. Some of the most compelling images I use were taken in the early 1900s and are part of my child labor series. All the photos from that series were taken by Lewis Hine, a retired school teacher, as he traveled across the country documenting children working in factories, farms, and yes, coal mines. This is Glimpse of Daylight, the Boys of the Mines, with boys from West Virginia and Pennsylvania. The older boys were 11 and 12 years old, and you can see that their helmets actually carry a live flame for a light, not a bulb. The smaller boys, referred to as breaker boys, would sort the raw materials by hand, and they were as young as 5 and 6 years old. And for most of these boys, this was the beginning of their entire life's work. Next. One of the most delightful aspects of making quilts for me is dyeing and printing the fabric. After I choose images for a quilt, I then decide the color palette that I think will best express the story or the mood. I dye fabrics using various shibori and resist techniques, as well as low water immersion dyeing. Most of my fabrics have been dyed at least twice, layering the patterning and the colors. Next. It's always exciting to unroll a piece of fabric to see the results. I wear a mask when I mix the dyes, which helps prevent irritation, especially if I'm dyeing every day for several days in a row. Preparing fabrics for a large quilt of mine can easily take 2 to 3 weeks of daily dye sessions. Although today I might need that mask to go to the grocery. Next. After the fabrics are ready, I silk screen the images, which is done in a very traditional way, emulsion coated screen exposed in a darkroom. I iron my cut fabrics onto freezer paper, which makes them really easy to handle. I'm really fortunate to be able to rent studio space at Artist Image Resource in Pittsburgh, a print shop available to local artists. Because printing with silk screens takes a lot of space, it can be very messy, so I'm really happy that I don't have to do this at home. In these photos, you can see that I'm printing some of the vintage feed sacks for my American Portrait series about independent family farmers, as well as some hand-dyed fabrics. Feed sacks are definitely wild cards to print and really unpredictable. And printing is unpredictable. If you get a bad pull and it's a bad print, that's the end of that piece of fabric or that feed sack. Next. Finally, I'll close. As you can see, with a background in journalism and photography, I'm really just a storyteller at heart. Creating these sometimes imaginary narratives from a point in history, combining images that I think speak to each other and maybe to you, is really at the heart of my work. I end with this one. It's called Heart of the Home. It's a recent quilt featuring the women, young mothers, and girls from the Dust Bowl era, printed on the vintage feed sacks. This quilt has become one of my favorites. I hope it's one of yours. Thanks so much for your attention.